Hello everybody, this is your host Colin McIsaac from the Nintendo Week podcast. On this week's show, the three of us talked about our all-time 5 favorite Nintendo games, what our favorites are, why we love them, and what makes them so dang special. The full episode is available now on iTunes, but it was long, so here on YouTube we're splitting it up into 2 discussion videos. One for our honorable mentions, that's about 10 minutes, and one for our top 5s, that's about 30 minutes. Keep watching this video for our full discussion on what makes our top 5 games so special, and be sure to check out our honorable mentions to see which games didn't make the cut, but we love too much to ignore. Otherwise, let's get to it. Hello everybody and welcome back to Nintendo Week. I'm your host Colin McIsaac and I'm joined as always by Alex Plant.
I can't wait to play as myself in Mario Maker.
And Ben Lemoreau.
I can't wait to play as Alex in Mario Maker.
So let's jump into our top 5s. Alex, what you got?
Number 5 is Xenoblade Chronicles.
Okay, cool.
It's my favorite JRPG ever, I would say. And what I love most about it is that it takes that sort of linear hero's tale storytelling that people love about JRPGs, but it manages to make the game feel like an open world game. So while you're sort of progressing through areas one by one after another in a linear fashion that's you can't really deviate from, each of the areas themselves is basically a full game world. You could have an entire game just set in those spaces. That's how big and expansive and exploration friendly they are, and so that was something that really struck me the first time I played. Where as soon as the game kind of gives you control and drops you into an open area, I think I deviated from the story for about 5 or 6 hours just wandering the field, the first field that you come to, and that's something I never really had a chance to do in a game before, and so I really loved that. I'm looking forward to doing that again in Xenoblade Chronicles X. That's probably the thing I'm looking most forward to, is having a fresh world that I've never seen before and just having complete free reign to go at it as I will. And on top of that, I love the battle system. A lot of people think it's too simplistic and not really that exciting, but I like the way that it's based on momentum and flow, where you have to kind of chain your moves together in a nice, satisfying, effective way. Whereas at most JRPGs, it's more about finding weaknesses and exploiting them. So I really love that about Xenoblade as well.
Very nice. I haven't played it, but I've heard it's a great choice.
Yep. And I even recommend the 3DS version.
Yeah.
Gasp. My number 5 is Super Mario World.
Nice.
It's largely for nostalgia purposes. I mean, it is a great game. The game design is good, and it looks great, and it's tons of fun, and I still enjoy playing it to this day. But I think one of the reasons why I've enjoyed it so much is that it's one of the first, if not the first, video games that I have memory of playing.
Me too, actually.
And my next door neighbor had a Super Nintendo when we were little, and this was early '90s, before there was really much of a big internet presence. I certainly didn't have access to the internet at the time. So we discovered, all the secrets of the game on our own, and I just remember, how exciting it was to, find alternate paths on the overworld and discover hidden levels, or, the top secret world where you just, get, 26 items for no reason, and, discovering Star Road and all that. So it's one of the first games that I have any memory of just, uncovering secrets and being excited about all this hidden stuff inside the game.
Nice. Awesome. Well, my number 5 is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, which I think is the best Paper Mario game. I think not many people would disagree with me there. Just the writing is amazing, the visuals are amazing. I really love the sort of aesthetic and the feeling of Rogueport and the whole sort of, country of thieves idea that Paper Mario's in. But the worlds are so varied and beautiful, and there's just so much great stuff that goes on. That really makes the gameplay dynamic, that really makes the story dynamic, that really makes everything just so inviting and exciting and just really so much fun to play. I just love that game to bits, so that is my number 5.
Good choice.
I'm going to break your heart and say it's not my favorite Paper Mario game.
Are you serious?
I am serious. I love the world.
You're not allowed to have any more opinions here, Alex.
Yeah, well. You already have the wrong 2D platformer on your list, so that's fine. But I love the world, and I love the story, and I love the characters, but I just felt like the world design, the gameplay aspect of it, was not as refined as the original, and not as pure. I felt a lot of it was about jumping through story hoops, as opposed to navigating a dungeon that's just a great, well-designed dungeon. Which is not to say the design is bad. It's just not, for me, as satisfying as the original Paper Mario.
I see what you're saying. Now, as far as dungeon design, I can definitely sort of see what you're saying on that point. I obviously haven't played either of them recently enough, and with that in mind, but I can imagine that being done better in the original.
Yeah, like Glitzville is a good example. It's a great sort of story segment.
Oh, I think that was like the best sort of dungeon design, because it was completely threw everything we knew about dungeons on its head.
I guess you could see it that way, but it's
I can see how you didn't like it.
It's a great story segment. I mean, it's like sort of like you said, it's not a traditional level, but it's not. It didn't really feel like a level to me.
Right, I gotcha, and I can appreciate that. So, what's your number 4?
Number 4 is Splatoon.
Wow,
Nice.
already.
Oh,
I am that attached to this game already.
Oh, I made this list before Splatoon came out because we were like recorded this discussion originally.
Yeah, we actually tried out this discussion originally.
Yeah, that's right. I never like erased my list.
Mine's mostly the same, but
yeah, mine too.
I definitely wanted Splatoon on my list. It's just.
Can we talk about how you're saying Splatoon?
My wife's been saying it, and I can't get it out of my head.
I mean, that's how they say it in the commercials, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say it.
Yeah,
it was
it's
from the commercials.
weird. I think everyone says Splatoon though.
Splatoon sounds better. I'm stuck on Splatoon. But it's such a unique shooter.
Yeah.
Like I've never played a shooter that's so conscious of its level design that the level design, like the levels themselves, are part of the gameplay.
Right.
Because you have to shoot basically the entire level to win turf wars, and so that means you have to kind of know where all the nooks and crannies are, how to exploit them. The fact that you can swim up walls means you have to think about how walls will interact, how you move, and it's such a thoughtful game. And it's not. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of something I could see from the original trailers, but just playing it and then experiencing the diversity in the maps, it's just such a great formula.
Yeah, totally with you.
And I love that it's a team-based shooter at its core, which is not something you'd expect from Nintendo's first shooter IP. I mean, in hindsight, it feels so right that it's hard to imagine that it was not something I would have expected them to do with their first shooter.
Right.
But it's so progressive in terms of the way it approaches online that they're jumping straight to the team-based shooter.
Well, for Nintendo, it's progressive.
Well, yeah, for Nintendo, it's progressive.
For everyone else, this is like 2007.
And I love the way they've been expanding it. I know a lot of the content was on disc originally, and so, we had that discussion earlier about how that we don't necessarily think that's a wholly positive thing, but the way they've approached it with Splatoon has been very thoughtful, and they want as many people playing together as possible. So they make sure every map gets in rotation. They make sure every mode gets in rotation. They make sure every weapon is something that you'll see. Something that you might try out. I just love it, and there's more to come too. Like Rainmaker just came out. I've been playing the heck out of that. It's my favorite ranked battle mode now, just because of how freaking hectic it is, and how refreshing a change of pace it is from Turf Wars. And I don't know. I'm excited to see where this game is going. I'm excited to see it become a full IP and not just this one-off thing on Wii U.
Right.
And I just love it.
Yeah, I throw that in my honorable mentions, like with the Smash and Mario Kart sort of thing, because that is an amazing game. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, number 4 is Pokemon Soul Silver and/or Heart Gold. Take your pick. I love the second generation of Pokemon. I feel like the first 2 generations have the strongest lineup, and then I enjoy both of those regions, which is again probably mostly nostalgia. I don't know if they're objectively better than the other regions. But I also love the newer game mechanics, especially in terms of like battle mechanics, splitting the physical and special moves apart and things like that. So I loved being able to have that Gen 4 and on battle system and graphics in the Gen 2 experience. That to me is just that's perfect. That's everything I want out of a Pokemon game.
Nice. Yeah.
Yep.
Good choice.
Although I will say I miss the original dungeon layouts and gym layouts.
Yeah.
But you guys know how I feel about classic dungeon design.
I do agree they sort of dropped the ball. But anyway, number 4, Alex is going to hate me, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze.
Yay.
Yeah. Or I guess it was in your honorable mentions.
It was
too.
in my honorable mentions.
I think Tropical Freeze is the best 2D platformer ever made. It really sort of blew my mind how good a game it was, because I had felt like we were at this point with games and 2D platformers specifically, where we know what a 2D platformer is. They can't evolve. They can't do better than they have in the past. And then Tropical Freeze just blew the doors open in terms of not only level design, not only gameplay mechanics, but also how the visuals and the music and just all the sort of sensory experiences that you can have in a video game all coming together and working with the mechanics and the and the level design to make these really dynamic, evolving levels that are just really incredible stuff. And so that really stuck out to me as this evolution of the 2D platformer that I never could have imagined was possible, but is amazing, and it's just phenomenal. I love Tropical Freeze. I was originally pretty bitter that that's what Retro was doing, because Returns was good, but
Returns was also very Returnsy. It was very rote.
Yeah, but then Tropical Freeze did such an amazing job doing everything. New Super Mario Bros. Can learn a lesson from Tropical Freeze about how to build on a reboot, and not make it feel like just another reboot just 2 more years later.
Yeah.
They evolved so much. It really feels like a new entry in the Donkey Kong Country series, whereas a lot of the time stuff like that, for example, New Super Mario Bros. Again, it doesn't feel like another new entry in the core sort of thread. It feels more like an iteration on the latest new entry.
Yeah.
Which is what Super Mario has been feeling like for a little while. Amazing game. Just, you've all got to play it.
Yeah,
Best
definitely.
2D platformer in my mind.
And I'm sad that a lot of you have probably skipped it.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of add to what you're saying. It has a lot of the creativity that you'll get out of a lot of those 2.5D side-scrolling indie games. But on top of that, it also has the really satisfying, really well-developed, really perfected classic feel, and that's something that you don't get out of platformers these days.
Yeah, and that's something you don't really see, and it's amazing. It's amazing to see this happen to games.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've said that a lot. Let's move on.
Yeah. Number 3 for me is Super Mario Galaxy.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, I'm blowing your mind again.
I didn't have that on my list anywhere, and I can't believe it. I'll throw it in the honorable mentions.
And you call yourself a Nintendo fan. For me, it's sort of the equivalent to DKC Tropical Freeze for you in 2D platformers, but with 3D platformers, where it's definitely a 3D Mario game, but on top of that, it's so creative with its level design. It sort of throws what you know about game universes out the window and kind of completely twists the Mario universe.
The Mario Galaxy.
The Mario. They should make a Mario universe, by the way. My wife says that's the only logical place to go at this point.
That's what I thought the Wii U one was going to be called.
I know, it'd be a nice pun. I doubt it'll happen at this point, but No. But it's such a fun game. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but at the same time, it has this sort of really grand feel, and a lot of that is conveyed by the soundtrack, but also the visuals, which are stunning and beautiful in a way that I honestly didn't expect from a Mario game.
Well, and from a Wii
2006.
game.
Yeah, from a Wii
game.
Yeah,
I mean, its presentation has not been topped in a Mario game since. In most Nintendo games.
I'd even say that despite being on Wii, it's probably one of the prettiest games of last generation, and that's quite an achievement.
Yeah.
I already talked about its soundtrack, but its soundtrack is...
Oh man, wow.
It's
too good.
Beautiful game. I replay it fairly often. I haven't replayed it in a while, but maybe I'm due. Maybe I should play it again.
Number 3 on my list is a game that I've beaten more times than I can count, probably. Metroid Fusion.
Okay.
I know a lot of people prefer Super because it's the more definitive open-world Metroid experience, and Fusion's a little more linear. But I really love the story-driven aspect of Fusion and just the fear of encountering the SAX. And it has a lot more of a sort of like a survival horror feel to it to me than any of the other Metroid games. Because, in all the games you kind of start with nothing and you're taking on a big environment. But this one, you get stripped of all your weapons and armor and equipment, and then your enemies are using it against you. And, you're being guided through this creepy place and being told you only have a 5% chance of survival and that there's a version of you at full power hunting you down. And I've even though it's not as open, I love the level design. I feel like it's, got very good environments. And, just start to finish, I love that game. I have to play it at least once a year, and I usually am not satisfied until I've 100%ed it.
Nice.
Watch what you say, though, about story-driven Metroid games.
Well,
you are just setting yourself up for disaster, my friend.
I thought about opening by saying Other M was my choice, just to see what you guys would say. I don't mind a lot of story in the Metroid as long as it's done well, but Other M's story was not done well.
Yeah, Fusion did it well, is the thing.
Yeah. And I agree with you that the world isn't too bad despite being more linear. On a sort of room by room basis, I feel like it's more polished than Super Metroid.
Absolutely, and the just the general game mechanics, the control's so much better.
Yeah.
Like when I play Fusion,
Yeah.
even though I know Super's a great game, it's hard for me to play Fusion and then go back and play Super. Like the floaty mechanics just don't do it for me like Fusion does.
I'm glad you said that because I have the same experience. I can't.
Yeah, same here.
The way Super Metroid controls just it's not intuitive for me. Having played Fusion and Zero Mission first, I love Super Metroid, but I just can't do it.
And Alex, you talked earlier about how Xenoblade has these large open world segments, even though the game is actually, linear in progression. And I feel like that's kind of how Fusion is as well. Like it's got 7 different pretty large explorable environments. You just have to play them in a specific order.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So my number 3 is Pikmin, which is an amazing game. I love that it's like this really creative, fresh new sort of RTS game, but I also love it has this really, and I'm talking about the original Pikmin here.
Okay.
I think 2 and 3 did great things, and mechanically, I think they certainly improved on the original. But the original Pikmin also has this really self-contained sort of narrative, and this really deep feeling of, like, it's really, in part, a survival game, I feel like. And you really get that sense with the 30-day system, how there's no lenience. It's not a difficult time limit. It's pretty easy to get all the stuff in that time. But it still gives you that sort of sense of unease. All the dialogue that Olimar has, and a lot of this stuff is just reinforced through the game mechanics and through... It's just such a nice, cohesive, wonderful experience. And I think the narrative is something that... It's something you really have to clue in on and pick up. But once you do, I really appreciate it. It's also one of those games that's like that 6-hour thing I was talking about with Luigi's Mansion. It's a perfect length to go in and replay and try to do better and better each time. Pikmin is another game that gives you like a high scoreboard at the end of it. So yeah, I really love that self-contained, wonderful experience of sort of the journey of Captain Olimar, as told through these new gameplay ideas that are fresh and exciting and really, really unique.
I guess it's time for my number 2.
I guess so.
Metroid Prime. Specifically the Wii version that came with Trilogy. This was my first dip into the Metroid universe, so maybe it's a little bit unfair for me to pick this one. But I might have said this before on the podcast too, but Metroid Prime was in some ways the perfect modern reboot of a classic franchise, in that it stuck to all the things that made the classic games great, but then it brought them into the modern version of that genre, which is the first-person shooter adventure game, versus, the 2D side-scrolling shooter that it started out as. And the results are absolutely phenomenal. Many people consider it one of the best single-player first-person shooter games ever created. I'm among them. The universe is great. The way it explored what's going on in the Metroid universe was great, and that's something we hadn't seen before. The Metroid games had typically been very story light, and you just kind of get the synopsis. But Metroid Prime has a living, breathing world and living, breathing story. And the way the story is told is very appropriate for Metroid, in that you're Samus, a solitary explorer, but you're kind of discovering what's going on this hostile foreign planet and what's going on with your enemies, and it's great. It's a great game, and I recommend it to everyone.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you all the way on that. Metroid Prime is an amazing experience, and everyone needs to play it.
Yeah, great sci-fi universe.
Yeah, and the new play control stuff is incredible too. It just makes the gameplay so much smoother and better, I think.
So number 2 for me, this is another game that I have to, bust out pretty regularly and replay. It's EarthBound.
Yeah!
I don't know, just everything about that game immerses me. I've never been so immersed by a 2D game before, so invested in the characters. And I always have to name the characters in-game after, people that I actually know and things like that to give it more of a connection. But just the humor in the game, the dark storyline, the great RPG mechanics, the memorable characters, the varied environments, the incredible soundtrack.
The great way that it doesn't let you run.
Well, other than that. But just so many things about that game.
No, I know. I'm with you. It's amazing.
Alex is a heathen
Awesome.
and hasn't played.
Yeah, I'm a backwards.
Yeah, we've established
man.
this. I feel like this is like the 20th episode in a row that EarthBound has come up, and Alex has been like, I haven't played it.
Well, we need to continually shame him.
We should just change the name of the podcast.
Nintendo Week.
Wow.
Nice.
So that's perfect, because my number 2 is Mother 3, which is on here for all the same reasons I think that EarthBound is on yours. But I think Mother 3 just took the whole sort of... We talked about before how the EarthBound series likes to tell its narrative through RPG mechanics. And Mother 3 just, I think, takes that to the whole next level. I obviously don't want to spoil it for anybody, but, the story is really emotional and meaningful, I think. And the way that they tell it, especially towards the end, through these mechanics, is just... It really tugs at your heartstrings, man. Like... That game was just such an incredible experience all the way through.
I'm a robot, and it gave me feels.
It was also, I was surprised at like how deep it was and sort of how dynamic the field of emotions that it touches upon. It felt almost like Itoi had a movie in mind and decided, you know what, instead I'm going to bring this to games. And it was really incredible. It just made a huge impact on me. I love Mother 3. I think it's one of the best games ever made. By this point in our top lists, we're probably just beyond top Nintendo games and onto, at least for me, onto my top favorite games ever. And Mother 3 takes number 2. It's just that amazing. It's one of the best games I've ever played. I think probably one of the best games I ever will. And you all need to play it. I cannot understate how good they did. And that's not English, but it's really early, so it's okay.
Number 1 for me is Ocarina of Time 3D.
Nice.
You touched on a lot of the reason why I feel that way earlier when you were talking about the way it expanded the Zelda game world, but at the same time was a great entry point. It felt like, in very many ways, it felt like the first Zelda game, even though it wasn't the first Zelda game, because of just how much world building.
How much it did to open the world.
Yeah. Especially with how they introduced the different races and sort of made Hyrule feel like a place that was lived in and was in fact a fantasy kingdom and not just a place where monsters are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just, this big overworld with one village. It's actually a thriving, lived-in community.
Yeah.
And not just one community, but several communities that interact with each other. And it felt like a world. It didn't feel like a game.
It didn't feel like just a game. It felt like a game set in a world.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing. But at the same time, it didn't go completely overboard with its story or script. It's a very pure game.
Right.
Just with this story and characters kind of layered in just the right way. And for that reason, it's my favorite Zelda game, probably one of my favorite sort of adventure story-driven games. And at the same time, it has sort of hints of non-linearity, especially in the adult segment, where you can kind of do the first 3 dungeons sort of in whatever order you want, and then the last 2 dungeons before Ganon's Tower in sort of whatever order you want. You can really break that game open and exploit it in a lot of ways to make your play experience different and fresh and new and difficult. And those are the things that really stick out to me. I know a lot of people consider it a masterpiece, one of the best games ever. Like that's often agreed upon. But the reason why I picked the 3DS version over the Nintendo 64 version is the Nintendo 64 version, while it is wonderful, was kind of a piece of work back in its day, or today rather. The graphics are a little dated. The frame rate is pretty unacceptable. The pre-rendered backgrounds kind of looked horrendous in hindsight, and Ocarina of Time 3D kind of corrects all of that. It brings the art style out really beautifully. It adds sort of color and flavor to a lot of the blander environments, in particular those ones that were pre-rendered originally, and the frame rate is really smooth. So,
I do wish they would update it with the C-Stick.
Yeah, they should make a Wii U version that uses the camera controls.
Or that. I meant just the Majora's Mask thing.
No.
Do a
Wii U version.
I mean, I agree with that too. I'm not tired of Ocarina of Time. I would love Ocarina of Time HD.
Yeah, it could straight up just be Ocarina of Time 3D in HD with a C-Stick controls, and it'd be fun.
No, that would be too ugly.
Well, I mean,
the models wouldn't work.
They brush it up and make it look good in HD, but I mean...
But at that point, why not just make a full... Anyway, we're harping on something that's not really relevant anymore. I just realized, though, we didn't have a big dramatic lead-up to number ones. So I guess we'll do that for Ben and Alex. You jump the gun, so you don't get a dramatic lead-up. Hit us, Ben.
My number 1 is also a Zelda game. It is A Link to the Past.
Awesome.
That's fair.
This is another game that I've beaten more times than I can count. It was the first Zelda game I played, one of the first video games, period, that I played. and I think you guys have both heard this rant from me before, but I think it has the perfect balance of 4 elements that, to me, just make up the definitive Zelda experience. And that's a balance of story, combat, exploration, and puzzles in perfect harmony, where none of them is focused on so much that it overpowers the other ones. Yeah. And I think more than any other Zelda game, A Link to the Past just nailed that balance.
Yeah, I'm with you on
disagree.
that. I think it really did. No one have anything else to say about A Link to the Past? I mean, I don't have anything to say. I'm just surprised that nobody does. This never happens. This is A Link to the Past.
That was a pretty all-encompassing comment, rather.
It really was. Yeah. Good job, Ben.
Woo, woo.
So my number 1 then, I'll give boom, 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 boom. It is Pokemon Johto stuff. Any of them. I include Gold and Silver and Crystal for the nostalgia's sake. I think, like, in the context of their own time, they are the best Pokemon games. So that goes for Ruby and Sapphire in 2003. That goes for Diamond and Pearl in 2007. Gold and Silver in 1999, I think that was the best that Pokemon has ever been. I mean, it really hit on so many things that the originals did so well. It expanded upon them. It blew the doors open. It was originally made to be the final game in the series. They just wanted a sequel and then move on from Pokemon. Obviously, they couldn't do that because it was hugely successful. But you can really feel the ways that they really designed it to be this sort of epic culmination of everything that Pokemon was. You battle Red and Mount Silver. The credits theme is just amazing and fun and exciting, but then it becomes bittersweet. To me, that is what Pokemon should be. That's what it is about at its heart. I think the newer games have sort of, I wouldn't say lost their way, but they are not that same way anymore. But that's what really strikes me about Pokemon as being that essential flavor that you need, and Gold and Silver nailed that so perfectly. And then I think Heart Gold and Soul Silver, because they were revisiting Johto, of course, they had an amazing starting point. But even from that starting point, I think they did the best job in the Pokemon series, and of a lot of games, really, of bringing that original flavor into the modern era. Obviously, you can't understate how great the gameplay mechanics changes, like, Ben, you mentioned the special and physical attack split.
Right.
Those sorts of mechanics, those sort of updates that they brought, like with the berry pots and, like, the Pokemon walking with you, that is just such an amazing...
Yes, that was a great touch.
Like, you need that in Pokemon. That's what Pokemon is about. They just did so much right, visually and mechanically and story-wise. It just, no matter which Johto game you play, it is the heart of what Pokemon is, and it's just the quintessential experience for me, I think, and I hope they get back to that sort of thing. I feel like a lot of the time in more recent games they're too focused on giving big stories with people who are trying to take over the world, but sort of lost the sense that I think it's really about, just some kid beating up some stupid criminals who think they're really cool. And yet it's like a personal journey, and it's a lot sweeter and more mundane, and I love it. I love everything about it. Johto's my baby.
It's amazing that was a game that was on a handheld like the Game Boy.
Right.
Like, in many ways, that makes it one of the most impressive handheld games probably ever made, just because of how much they managed to squeeze out of that thing.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 whole regions,
yeah.
250 Pokemon.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of, like, the stuff in Kanto, they had to slim down some of the routes, make them shorter to make it fit. But, that they put in all that time and made it work so well. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and then on top of that, like, even though the graphics aren't really the greatest thing ever or anything, they managed to make the world feel very satisfying to move around.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, wow.
Really great sense of placement, of location. A great sense, I think, of sort of the environments, too. I think they did a good job. I mean, they're not terribly varied environments like newer games have, but I think they did a great job sort of, like, placing the Pokemon that would appropriately fit in that sort of area. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then I think Heart Gold and Soul Silver kept that sense of placement and location and beauty in sort of the smaller things in the world. They just really nailed that visually. The way the grass was sort of patchier, and the way there's a little bit of variance in the trees. In every way, that is the perfect Pokemon game, I think. I don't think they've topped it yet.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed our top 5s discussion. I know we had a good time. This is the end of Nintendo Week for today, though. If you like this podcast, please subscribe to us on iTunes or subscribe to us on YouTube at Gamnesia TV for bite-sized discussions from the show. And please head to iTunes to leave us a review. It really helps with visibility, so we greatly appreciate it, especially if you have good things to say instead of bad ones. If you have feedback for Nintendo Week, please send it to colin@gamnesia.com, and remember to send in your questions about Nintendo, about our show, about Super Mario Maker. We love engaging with you guys, and we read them and talk about them here on the show, so it's a great way to get involved. Again, that's colin@gamnesia.com, COLIN@gamnesia. If you can't wait till next week for more of our stuff, you can head to gamnesia.com to see more gaming news as it happens. We've got Sony, Microsoft, Indie, you name it, and even Nintendo news that we didn't have the time to discuss on this week's show. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have another great week.